The reports here in the overnight, it's not done, but it appears that the 76ers are going to be the team. They met with Paul George in California on Sunday evening into the night, and it's expected a max contract will be coming the way of Paul George, over $200 million, to head to the Delaware Valley so he can be harassed by Sixers fans and break their hearts just like he broke the hearts of Clipper fans. Good luck on that. All right, so let us discuss the question. Paul George expected to land in Philly. At the time we're talking, it's not a done deal. But Paul George in general, does it make sense for him to land with the 76ers? And do they become the team to beat in the East? If they add Paul George, that's a three-headed fire-breathing dragon with Maxey, Embiid, and Paul George. So does that make them the team to beat in the East? So I've got side hustle, cover charge, and treadmill. And we will combine all of these things together, and we will give you a migraine headache is what we're going to give you. So, A, to answer the question, does the Paul George transaction to Philadelphia push them into the pole position in the Eastern Conference? And I'm shaking my head no. Now, Paul George, there's some things he does very well. There's other things that he's terrible at, which is pretty true of anyone. But Paul George, while he makes the Sixers better when you look at a depth chart on your smartphone, you're like, well, I kind of like that name. I've heard of that name. That's a good name. But there's not a single man, woman, or child that, like the Boston basketball team, is like, oh, man, the Sixers are going to add Paul George. Holy crap on a cracker. This is it. The Celtics, one and done. They won their championship this generation, and it's all over now because of Paul George. No, because we know that Paul George has a tendency of going AWOL in stretches. He is a heartbreaker, Paul George, because at times he looks amazing, unstoppable. He'll go on stretches where he'll score 25 points in a quarter. It'd be amazing in a stretch of time. But PG-13, at this point in his career, he's more focused on the other things in life, it would appear, right? He's got the side hustle. It's all about the side hustle. You got to have that side hustle. And he's podcasting. Now, I have a podcast. It's my main job. That's what I do. It's a radio show, and I got the podcast on the weekend. But Philly will absolutely love hearing the latest stylings of Paul George, Podcast P, his new nickname, and Playoff P, of course, for his many vanishing moments in the postseason. But George, in basketball years, is getting a little long in the tooth. He's 34, 14 years in the NBA. And I look forward to seeing the feeding frenzy that will take place. I'll be sitting with a big smile on my face, Cheshire Cat smile, watching Paul George and how that goes down in Philadelphia. And when he dribbles and keeps the ball out of Joel Embiid's hands and tries to control everything, and things get clogged up like a toilet in Philadelphia offensively with Paul George when he's not making shots, and then he goes into ghost mode in key moments, what could possibly go wrong? And he does have a little bit of a similar pedigree to Joel Embiid, though, in that they have a history now of going missing for stretches of time in the playoffs. Now, page 2 here, the Clippers, the people's team, they chose James Harden as a priority over Paul George. Does that make sense? Does it make sense that the Clippers said we would rather be in business with Harden as opposed to George? They weren't going to keep both of them, but they made a tactical decision to go with James Harden. So on this side of the microphone, it does make sense. It does make sense, right? You can't keep everyone because it wasn't working, right? If it was working, you would have kept everyone, and Steve Ballmer's got more money than anyone, and he could have kept everyone he wanted. But from a fluidity standpoint, it was not working with the Clippers. So, yeah, the winds of change, they needed some new blood, some young blood in there. And he said, well, wait a minute. James Harden's not young blood. That is true. He is not young blood. But Harden, while he is not perfect by any means, in fact, he has some similar issues to Podcast P in that James Harden's actually a little older. The difference, though, on this is when hitting on all cylinders, James Harden's on one side and you've got Paul George on the other, and they're both playing at the peak of their superpowers. Who is better? the answer is James Harden. He's better than Paul George, all things being equal. And so if you can only have either one of those guys for a brief stretch of time, well, Harden better than George. Harden's an MVP in the past. He's got the accolades and all that. He's a better player. And he will facilitate the offense. And the Clippers only saw a little bit of that. They traded for him in a very dramatic early season NBA trade from Philadelphia after James Harden called Daryl Morey, the GM in Philadelphia, every name in the book made for good sports talk radio fodder. And so now Harden will be the number 2 behind Kawhi, but more likely than not the number 1 because Kawhi will do his usually malfeasance, his normal malfeasance where he won't show up. And now they can go together in the lab and figure out who's going to miss what playoff games and who's not going to show up in a playoff game and all that stuff. Now, the other Komodo dragon in the room, the Gila monster, if you will, in the room here, do the Clippers regret the trade for Paul George? They got Paul George back. It was 2019, another dramatic NBA offseason move. And they sent away Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and others, including some combination of 7 gazillion draft picks to acquire Paul George. Now, many people using revisionist history now are burying the Clippers. This is the worst trade of all time. So do the Clippers regret that trade? No, the answer is no. And if you say that it was the worst trade of all time, you're a moron. You're outing yourself to the world that you're stupid. You're a donkey. Okay, you understand that trade had to happen. Otherwise, the entire house of cards would not have been built. Okay? Because the trade with Oklahoma City, and I don't care about draft picks. Who cares about draft picks? You're just such a loser if you care about draft picks. Stop right there. But even if you're obsessed with draft picks, you had to make that trade. And here's why. Because that was the cover charge in order for Kawhi Leonard to go to the Clippers. Like Kawhi, the option's there. And he said, listen, I'm not going there unless you get me Paul George. Okay, Kawhi, we'll get you Paul George. But Kawhi, we've got to give up like everything. Okay, that's what you want? Boom, done. And so they were so horny to get Kawhi Leonard, and Kawhi Leonard was like, no, I can't go by myself. I'm not going to go alone. I need a wingman. And so they got Paul George, and that was the admission fee. And so fine. They've been a consistent contender. They have a seat at the grown-ups table in the NBA, the Clippers do. They got to a Final Four with Kawhi hurt and Paul George there. So that's a win. I'd much rather have years of contention than some draft picks. Who cares about draft picks? That's the bane of my existence. All right, now, last word here. One other transaction we should talk about, and there'll be many more throughout the night. Chris Paul. Now, I am so happy. I want to send hugs to San Antonio. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. So Chris Paul is headed to the Alamo, and he will have a side-by-side get-together with Wemby. So will he have a career revival? Will Chris Paul have a revival with Wemby? Said the wise man. The answer is going to be a no for me, dog. That would be a no. But I do want to thank the Spurs because I was concerned that Chris Paul was going to end up back with the Clippers. And I was hoping he'd go to the Lakers because he can't play anymore. He's done. So I was hoping that would happen. But San Antonio can go out there, hang out, and for the 5 or 6 games that he's perfectly healthy, he'll look great, and there'll be Lob City 2.0 with Chris Paul to Wemby, and that'll be great. But in order for this to work, it's a 1-year deal, so it's not like it's anything more than that. It's a stopover. And Chris Paul in the Alamo, they're going to need, for this to work, they're going to need to buy a treadmill, but not just any treadmill. They're going to have to get their hands on the cosmic treadmill from The Flash. Okay, they're going to have to get the cosmic treadmill from The Flash because they got to go back and back in time in about 10 years. So they need superhuman speed to go back about 10 years on that treadmill because Chris Paul is cooked. He is absolutely cooked. You know it, and I know it, and even the Spurs know it. Everyone knows. He's a legend of the game. You got to have him out there. Legend of the game. And if nothing else happens, at least Chris Paul can teach Wemby how to whimper and moan and complain to the referees. And Scott Foster will have more opportunities to officiate Chris Paul games and the conspiracy theories can continue around him.